Hello everybody, my name is Nick Starwind, and today we'll be talking about, after months of YouTube silence, the exact same subject again. I have no idea how it came to be, but that's just how the dice rolls. But it's with good reason, as I felt if I did a few more videos and then went back to it, I may scare off audiences who came for this type of video in the first place. Unless you're a devoted fan, like that one person who waited patiently for me to finish Formation's Horrors, and by God was it not worth it for you. So, what am I talking about? Well, this is the sequel to my previous review in relation to the Thomas the Tank Engine missing episode known as The Missing Coach. So, if you haven't seen that already, I would go watch that first and then continue with this video, as I don't really want to repeat myself unless I have to, so links are either above, below, to the side, in your pockets, or wherever YouTube wants to put it these days. And, well, I'll wait. Finished? You sure? It was a long video, you sure you don't want a tea break or other non-British related snackings? No? Well, good. Okay, let's begin then. Cue the intro! Imagine a scenario you cannot feel or see, but somehow creates a problem you couldn't predict. The man in his 30s is recycling the same joke, despite only writing one monologue for this bit. He believes he may never have to use this intro again, even though there are many more mysteries out there. He hopes to be more original next time, but forgetting this is the Starwind Zone. It may never get used again, but boy, do I never get tired of it. So in the last video, we discussed about the series, the missing pieces of media and cancelled episodes, and the planning that went into Season 2. This then led to us going into detail about the Missing Coach episode, ending with what footage exists that gives us evidence to the episode being made. I actually forgot to mention about another piece of information in relation to early adaptations to the series, and because there is barely anything about it, I thought I'd say it here then, make another video about it. So after the disaster of the 1953 BBC adaptation of The Sad Story of Henry, it wouldn't be until 1973 where the legend of the West End musicals, although a bit dull for my taste, Andrew Lloyd Webber proposed the idea for an animated series on the original books. There was a lot of apprehension towards this, as Webber wanted full control of both the current books and any future ideas that were to be had involving the series, because it would secure funding from American backers apparently. Which Audrey really didn't like, because he felt the Americans would essentially destroy what was so special, which I totally understand, because no offense America, you do have a habit of doing that. So, what happened? Well, the pilot was produced by Granada TV, with Brian Cosgrove of Cosgrove Hall fame working on the pilot, which was to be in the animation style of Ivor the Engine, and was completed in 1976. Due to circumstances involving no interest from the US market and other projects taking up Webber's time, the project was cancelled, leaving these two images to show evidence of its existence. I would say this is sad, but I am 100% certain I would have not been a fan if these were my first introductions to the series, because they are ugly as hell. And that is it. Aside from putting inspiration from the Railway series into his musical Starlight Express, nothing else came from it, thankfully. So, let's continue with this video. So despite being under the belief that these pieces of photography and footage were the only things we know about the episode, you, the lovely people of the Thomas community, have given me more information, including some other pieces of footage that shows Britt Orcroft didn't cut the episode while being filmed, but in fact had filmed the entire thing and merely didn't record the audio, and making changes to the following episode Breakfan. I also discovered some differences between the VHS and the restored editions of the other Donald and Douglas episodes, which could hint towards there being a possible archived copy of the missing episode, but that's towards the end. So one of the things I mentioned in my previous video was that the only pieces of footage that were missing from the episode were ones in relation to the introduction of the missing coach itself and characters like Gordon and Thomas pulling it, including interaction with the twins. This was because there was no evidence that I could find showing the special coach in any of the discovered footage and pictures, leading me to believe that they never commissioned to have one made, hence those sequences not being seen. This, however, was until a few weeks ago when a user on Twitter posted images from Season 2 showing the special coach actually in the sidings of the Tidmouth Station set, specifically in Thomas, Percy and Nicole, Thomas Comes to Breakfast, and one I found from Woolly Bear. Some of you may argue that this isn't the special coach at all, because in other episodes there are multiple coaches in this colour and could just be a part of those sets. The only issue with that though is that this is one coach on show at Tidmouth in all these shots, whereas on the other side it's always free, so there is no connection and must mean this is the special coach. Now I know a lot of you wanted to keep reminding me about Thomas, Percy and Nicole not being the replaced episode, even though I specifically stated that there was no evidence to support it anyway. But when looking at the screenshots above and the episodes involved, and especially the fact that Cole was a single narrative episode and Thomas Comes to Breakfast was a one of 3-part story, much like how the twin story arc was going to be, it doesn't strengthen the argument that it was a replaced episode, but in fact highlights to us the production scheduling around the sets used and when it was filmed. I have a theory with a few images to back it up to say that Thomas, Percy and Nicole wasn't filmed in replacement of the missing coach, but was scheduled to be released after what we called the Daisy arc, but was later changed to the first episode. Seeing as at the start of Season 2 we concentrated on the Edward the Blue Engine book and the Cole episode, the other 2 stories that joined the Cole episode, The Runaway and Better Late Than Never, were actually a part of the new book more about Thomas the Tank Engine, but were scattered around rather than being one after the other. In the beginning of the series, mainly the first 3 seasons to be specific, because of the budget limitations and studio space, the teams would usually set up one set at a time, film all the sequences for the season on that set, and unless they needed any pickups, they would dismantle the set and build the next one, normally because some sets were used more than others and probably seen as a waste of space to keep one set assembled when it was barely being used. The first piece of evidence that made me think this was the Tidmouth Shed set in Season 3. As pointed out by another fan, it shows that they filmed one half of the season first and then the second half afterwards, which is why the continuity of the location is very different in Gordon and the Famous Engine and then Escape, which came towards the end of the season. Note the dramatic differences in the surroundings and siding setup. So when you look at Season 2, you can tell that Tidmouth hasn't been touched, except for a few minor arrangements for specific episodes. And because of this, you can see echoes of past recorded pieces in the background of certain scenes, showing almost the order they were filmed in, whether it's because it would take too much time to rearrange stuff, or just a lack of hindsight on their part when framing up. For example, we know Breakvan and the Missing Coach came before Thomas Comes to Breakfast, because in these 2 shots, not only do you see the special coach, but you also see Donald's tender firmly wedged under the signal box. And although I can't quite make it out, I believe that after this episode, Thomas, Percy and Nicole was filmed because in this shot, you can see a slight black mould in the background in front of the station master's house. I think this is from Thomas Comes to Breakfast after Thomas is rammed into the house. And after that we don't really see anything else, so I believe that the rest, such as Ghost Train and Woolly Bear, followed at a later date, as the sets have been cleaned up of the previous episode markings before being possibly coated in snow for Thomas and the Missing Christmas Tree. So now that we have all that nitty gritty information out the way, because there is a lot more I could talk about involving the corners cut during shooting. What new evidence have I found about the missing coach that warranted another video? Well, remember when I said before that not all the episode was filmed? Well, from what I heard from different sources on the grapevine, it turned out to be false, and the full episode was actually finished and it was just a narration that was never recorded. How do I know this? Well, I actually missed some more recycled footage that connects to this episode, excluding of course the missing coach sitting in the background. So just as Donald is giving the brake van a good push, it goes from a behind shot where we see Donald clearly in the yard beside some flatbed trucks, to this reverse shot where he is much further back. But do you notice something? If you look to the left of the shot, you can see what appears to be Annie and Clarabelle clearly sitting at the station on the opposite side of the platform, showing that Donald is further back to the point he's at the buffers, similar to where Thomas is at the end of Better Late Than Never and Bertie's chase. Now going back to the first shot, all the lines are blocked leaving the station, either with rolling stock or Douglas staring into space. So it would be really difficult for Thomas to leave. So if it's true, why is Annie and Clarabelle there? Because we know from Better Late Than Never that Thomas has to come through in that direction to get to his branch line, while Gordon will arrive from the opposite direction as shown in the missing Christmas tree. I think that the two shots involving this angle are actually ones from the missing coach, because it would link with Thomas coming to find a special coach and Douglas being clueless. But because the camera has the tender covered, you wouldn't be able to tell if it was Donald or Douglas. But just before we move on to the next section of clips, I wanted to touch upon something involving the audio of the brake van episode. Seeing as I'm now fairly certain that the entire episode was made, it only means that the audio was the incomplete part of this puzzle. Following that information though, that means there was a script for Ringo Starr to read, which then had to be scrapped and any mention of the previous episode cut from the brake van. Don't think that's the case? Well, let's listen to this audio and you'll see.
"I'm sorry, sir," said Donald. "I should think so too."
Did you hear that long pause between the quote and the speaker?
"I'm sorry, sir," said Donald.
Doesn't sound very normal, and it almost sounds like he stumbles onto the final part. And the tone doesn't match the previous sentence either, like something was cut out between the two.
Coincidence? I think not!
So this clearly shows that there's been some editing going on with the audio, which leaves this very weird gap, which is very different from the opening sequence, which has been put in without any editing whatsoever. There isn't a lot else that could be said for this, as I wouldn't exactly know what dialogue would go in between these lines. But it highlights that not only was there a reading script, but also cutting down of audio files after Ringo Starr had recorded them. Now, going back to the previous clip I was talking about, there is another clip that matches up to it, and that is from Better Late Than Never, where Thomas comes into the station after being late. Now, there are two images I want to show you. One is from the episode, where you can see Thomas at the station with the passengers around him, and then this promotional shot, which doesn't have any passengers on the platform at all. Aside from a few differences with the lighting, which no doubt is due to one being a still shot and the other being a celluloid, Thomas's position is pretty much spot on to the brake van shot I was talking about. Now this is only speculation, but I believe either one of these shots were used in the missing coach, making the still image an alternate take at another angle for that episode. Now, why would I make that assumption? Because clearly we haven't already established that many pieces of the episode's footage was recycled for other stories to save time. Well, this is where it gets interesting and involves a tiny bit of a history lesson, because in the past involving old TV programming, when they finished an episode you would just have that final edit, which got sent out to TV stations, advertisers, and VHS production companies, and the rest were just normally scrapped. So the only ever copy you had was that final edit if that hadn't been destroyed as well, which made it very awkward later on when making DVDs, Blu-ray, and heck, digital streaming services of the episodes. Now, when I was originally reviewing these episodes in my last video, I was actually using the HD remastered versions, which, you know, very common to make remastered editions these days. Dragon Ball Z has one every year, for God's sakes. But what they normally do is clean up the footage, recolor any sections that were desaturated, add restored audio, and put it all together again. Except in this instance. Remember when I pointed out these continuity errors from Breakfan and the Deputation, saying that some of the lines used in the audio were redundant? Well, turns out these aren't the original shots. Now, in order to show you the differences, I'm going to need a VHS player and an old TV. And being a 2D character, that's going to be pretty difficult. Unless... Boop.
The Animals of Farthing Wood started off as a series of novels released back in 1978. It was written by author Colin Dan, and the first book was entitled, wait for it, The Animals of Farthing Wood. Following on from that first book, it expanded into a collection of novels that continued the animal stories into 8 other books, and it was only a matter of time before it was eventually commissioned from book to film in the early 90s by the European...
Ah, there we go. Now I just need a VHS player. Hey you!
What now?
I need you to hook me up with a VHS player.
Well, I'm a little busy at the moment.
No, you're not. You're in this shot.
That's not the point. I'm busy with other things.
Like what?
So that was a VHS player you're wanting, eh?
Thank you. Roll the clip. So here on the left is the restored footage I showed in the previous video, specifically the clips I talked about involving the nameplates being displayed when they shouldn't have been. Now look at the original footage from the VHS, which was also the same footage used on TV back in the 80s. Notice how some of the shots are actually missing the nameplates. Not all of them though, don't give them that much credit. They still couldn't get it right in some parts. Even this one I missed, where they took the plate off one side but kept it on the other, thinking we wouldn't notice. But lo and behold, the train comes round the corner and we can see it. Silly engine. Also, what makes me laugh is that you had such a hard time keeping those nameplates off the twins that in the Missing Christmas Tree episode, you've actually forgotten to put them on. How do you manage that? Breakfan isn't the only episode that have these differences. Many episodes in the first 2 seasons use other takes for the restored version, whether it's new angles, longer shots, or wide angle shots that were previously close-ups in the original, and in some cases, blooper reels, like this one from season 1 with Cole, where Henry rams into the building and then moves forward while the sound effect of Edward moving is heard as he's standing still. Now this is actually a lot more common than you think, because a lot of the time the original footage used for the final edit have been damaged beyond repair, normally through overuse, and a lot of the time because it's on video restoration doesn't turn out as well as you like, so they would have had to use alternative takes to fill in the gaps. And even then, sometimes you can actually tell in the restored versions when they were using celluloid and when they were using video by the slight fuzz that is created. It's actually quite fun to spot sometimes. But hold up, I hear you ask. Where did the other footage come from? I honestly have no idea. But the only explanation is that there is an archive of original rushes somewhere, and they would have had to refer back to them for using them in things like music videos, promotional footage, or, in this case, the remasters. So if that's the case, then instead of the rushes being with David Mitten's family or Britt Orcroft, they could be stored somewhere in these archives along with all the other rushes from the other productions. Seeing as, we have all this other footage for the remasters, it must clearly be somewhere with the others. Now, because Thomas & Friends is owned by Mattel now, this archive will most likely be with them, unless some other company holds the footage from a previous contract. I don't exactly know how it works. I can't imagine that every time the brand gets bought up they move everything to their warehouse, because stuff is bound to get lost. But if this is the case, all we can hope for is that someone points us out to a member of the staff that actually gives a damn about the series. Most likely someone who isn't part of the current path the series has taken, and one of those unsung heroes who remembers a time before Thomas got a passport. I mean, again, it's probably not the most important thing, but god damn it, I want answers, and I want my missing episode. So, that is pretty much everything I could possibly hope to talk about involving the mystery of the missing coach. I really wasn't planning on making a sequel to it, but I had the opportunity approach me, and then I realised, why not? And well, now that I've scraped the barrel of information on it, until the actual footage is found and released, I really don't have much else to say on the subject until that day comes. If it comes, of course. So until next time, which won't be a part 3 missing coach, I promise you that right now, unless it's released, I have been Nick Starwind, you have been my audience. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, stick it on a badger, attach it to a brick, throw it into the atmosphere, and hope when it lands you won't be going to jail for killing someone, because I really need those views. And I shall see you next time.